Hey guys, Enigmatic Mr. L here. I recently made a video going over Fire Emblem units that I think are more trouble than they're worth to recruit most of the time. But one thing I only briefly touched upon in that video is the idea of mutually exclusive Fire Emblem units. So Fire Emblem has an archetype known as like the Samson and Arran archetype, where in any given playthrough, there'll be two units, but you can only recruit one of them. And the other one, you have to wait until like a second playthrough to recruit them instead. So in every situation where that happens, I want to take a look and determine which one I believe is better and why. One thing to note is I'm not going to be looking at the substitute units in the second generation of Genealogy of the Holy War, just because 9 times out of 10, the substitutes are just kind of like the worst possible version you could get of the character they're substituting for. There are a few exceptions here and there, like the dancer gets charmed, but even then, I don't find it that interesting to talk about. Normally, I'm going to be looking at route split specific characters, particularly in Fates and Three Houses. I consider those routes like Birthright and Conquest, and like the three main routes, Black Eagles, Blue Lions, and Golden Deer, to be their own campaigns. So I'm not going to be looking at those units. With that out of the way, let's just get on with the list, starting with the very first, the trope namer, I guess, the archetype namer, Arran and Samson. So in chapter 16, I believe, in Shadow Dragon, the Blade of Light, you're given a choice, 2 villages. If you go to the west one, you recruit Arran. If you go to the east one, you recruit Samson. And then whichever village you visit, the other one will close their border off to you. Arran does have a greater mobility and like 1 point more defense, but Arran's stats are just overall better, like speed, HP, strength, skill. So for that reason, I'm going to say the winner here is Samson. Well, I would say normally like movement is the best stat. That is true. I'd found when I played Shadow Dragon Blade of Light, I think the first time I recruited Arran, and his stats were just so mediocre to do anything. Like, you have trained paladins at this point. You have Cain, Abel, Harden, and granted, Samson, he's not going to keep up with them, but he at least has decent combat potential. Like, if you're Iron Manning, I think he can fill roles better than Arran can. Next, I have Sonya and Deen in Fire Emblem Gaiden. The way this one works is, on your way to like a certain boss, you have to fight one of these two, and whichever one you don't fight and defeat, you'll recruit the other. So if you fight Sonya and defeat her, you'll recruit Deen, and vice versa. This one, I think, fairly clear winner. I'm going to go with Deen as the winner. All of his base stats, except he's tied in attack with Sonya. He has less resistance, but all of his base stats are overall better. And then besides HP, his growths are worse, but generally, like Fire Emblem Gaiden in general, all of your units have bad growth rates. And particularly in this game, the way promotion gains work, it just brings you up to the base stats of your promoted class. Growths aren't as important here as they are in other games. Just further adding into that, Deen is only 5 levels away from promoting into Dread Fighter. And I have more movement, and that helps, like, in the swamp, like, restricted movement, that sort of thing. Whereas Sonya requires, like, 15 levels to promote to, like, the female version of female sages to promote into, like, priestess. It requires just a lot more grinding, Sonya does have some good spells. She's got, I think, Excalibur at base, and she can learn, like, Sagittae and Sephirim. Very good skills, don't get me wrong, but I find generally they're more trouble than work to get there. Deen is just good, like right out the box, ready to go. Next, we have Arran versus Samson again, this time in Mystery of the Emblem, specifically Book 1. As when the first game, Shadow Dragon and Blade of Light, I could at least give Arran the benefit of like, well, his stats are worse overall, but I mean, at least he has more movement. This game, it's even further apart. It's just maybe because of one reason, Samson just completely outclasses Arran, dismounting. By the time Arran joins, there's like 7 maps left. After he joins, like 4 of them are indoors. And on indoor maps, Arran is pretty much just a strictly worse version of Samson. So as previously, I could see the argument for Arran, more mobility, get him to like reach objectives faster. Here, it's just like no contest. Samson is the better unit. Next, we have Johan and Johalvier, or it might be Johan, Johalvier, I'm not sure. Those are the names in the translation patch I used. That's the names they were given. I think the more recent names are Luchar and Lucharba. But anyway, they're just the 2 Axe brothers. One's an Axe Knight, promotes into Paladin, or I think Great Knight. The other one's Axe Fighter, promotes into Warrior. While I did say that in like Arran versus Samson debate, Samson has better stats, It is true here, the Axe Fighter has slightly better stats overall. I think the only stat the Axe Knight has, he has a little bit more skill. That's about it. Because Genealogy of the Holy War has such huge maps, this time I'm going to give it to the mounted unit. I'm going to give the victory to Johan. Johalvier does have a few advantages, or have one advantage in particular over his brother. If you're doing a ranked run, he has slightly better stats, combined with the fact that once he promotes, he gets access to bows. He can clear out the arena more effectively in a ranked run, trying to get everyone EXP. But in terms of practical contributions to your army, that's not a really big contribution. Like, the Axe Knight will at least, wound maybe say like 1.5 enemy per map, whereas the Axe Fighter, it'll be 0. So Johan, even though he's not great, he's pretty much the only one who's going to be using the Brave Axe, at least for a while. He can keep up with other mounted units, wound some enemies, maybe like defeat them outright, which is more than what you can say for the Axe Fighter, unless you're like really slowing down. Next, we have Olwen versus Ilios from Thracia 776. This one's a bit of an interesting one. Olwen just joined straight away in like Chapter 11X. You talk to her with Fred and recruit her. Then there's a route split later on. You can talk to Ilios with, I think, Karina is the Pegasus Knight's name, and recruit him, but only if Olwen was either never recruited or she's dead. It's very strange. The only thing I can think of is that there's 3 characters you can get in A route, there's only 2 in B route. They wanted to keep it like the same no matter what, but they could have just added another character to B route and have Ilios appear in both routes. But anyway, both of these are in the same class, promoted Mage Knight, and they have the exact same growth rates. Olwen does have more availability, but because of the way like Ilios' weird recruitment works, you can just use her for a little bit, and then like by the time you get to Ilios, just pull your eye gambit and intentionally kill Olwen off. Basically, Ilios, even if you train Olwen, Ilios is going to have better HP, better defense, better speed, better attack, and he has better sword rake at base. And he has 2 skills, Soul and Miracle, help his survivability a little bit. Even though neither one of them are really particularly reliable, it's still better than the 0 base skills Olwen has. So for that reason, I'm going to give it the win to Ilios. Olwen does have a few good things going for her. She has better base magic, despite joining chapters earlier. And she has the exclusive tome, Dire Thunder, can potentially also get a blessed sword from Reinhardt, but let's be honest, most players just kind of like warp skip that chapter anyway. I think Ilios is a decent enough unit, thanks to his it's more mixed attack or magic, can go either one, and greater survivability. Again, Olwen does have another good thing. She has a follow-up critical coefficient of 4 as compared to Ilios' 0, but it's not enough for her to get the win on this one. Next, still in Thracia 776, we have Amalda versus Conomor. If you go A route, you can get Sleuf and then recruit Amalda in Chapter 19, whereas conversely, if you go B route, you can get Miranda and then recruit Conomor in Chapter 19. Conomor does have better, I think, like offensive stats overall. He's better at combat, like slightly more HP, strength, and defense. Maybe speed, I'm not sure about that one. But the big advantage Amalda has is she has a C rank in staves as opposed to Conomor's, I think, A rank in lances. And so for that reason, I'm going to give Amalda the win here. Even though I think Conomor is better at fighting overall, at this point in the game, you probably have a decent enough amount of like combat units. And even though Amalda only has C rank in staves, that's still enough to use like physics, sleep, that sort of thing. She has a base magic of 13, which have her equip like the flame sword and bring her up to like 18 to use the sleep sets on like the more magical enemies like druids and the like. I just feel like Amalda offers more utility, which is Conomor. He's fine. Like if you get him, he can like be serviceable filler, but Amalda I think is like actively worth deploying in some maps if you get her. Or lastly, in Thracia 776, we have Sleuf and Misha in A route versus Shannam and Miranda in B route. And I'm not going to delay this one at all. It's clearly the A route character is by a mile. Sleuf is an character with A rank stats with no investment. Plus, you can promote him, get him even more stats, that sort of thing. Misha, she's not like a great unit, but she has good speed, skill, and surprisingly decent magic. If you want to give her like a flame sword or something. On the few outdoor maps available by the time she joins, she can like help ferry units across, that sort of thing. Whereas Shannon and Miranda are like the worst units in the game. Miranda just has terrible stats all around. She has Wrath as her only ability, but because of her low HP, she never really gets a chance to use it. Shannam does have the bargain skill, but at this point in the game, most of your shopping's already done, and he somehow has even less combat potential than Miranda. It's really just no contest. The A route characters are so much better than the B route exclusive characters. And okay, this is the last one in Operation 776. It's Saias versus Sed, both of the go-to archetype characters of the game. So Saias has 1 point more magic. He has, I think, one or two more Vigor Stars. I think one more Vigor Star. And most notably, he has 2 more Authority Stars. So that's +6 more hit on all of your units and +6 more chance to dodge. But the big draw for Zed is that he has Forseti, probably the strongest weapon in the game. Just adds a huge speed and skill boost, making them nearly untouchable. And it can just basically one-shot most enemies. I think the comparison is closer than some people give credit for. Saias' Forseti skill is kind of overkill on a lot of enemies, whereas Saias' leadership stars, and you can potentially recruit Saias easier. You can clear that map in 1 turn earlier if you don't recruit Sed. But even so, I still think Sed is overall the superior unit. Just Forseti is so good. And yeah, there are a few just generic enemies where the Forseti is just overkill. He's better off just using a generic wind tome or something. But for some the bosses and those sort of characters, Forseti really gets a chance to shine. Next, we have Echidna versus Bartre from the Binding Blade. Echidna is exclusive to one route. It's depending on which house you visit or which village you visit in Chapter 9, which of the 2 routes you go to. I think this is a pretty close comparison. Echidna does have more skill and a good amount more speed, whereas Bartre has more constitution, so that closes the speed gap a little bit. More HP, defense, and strength. Echidna has, I think, C rank in swords, B rank in axes, whereas Bartre's B rank in axes, D in bows, as opposed to many wars just having E. They're both kind of good for the few chapters after they join, but because of their low growths and their low EXP game, neither one of them is really going to hold up in the late game. It's close. I can definitely see the argument for Bartre, but I'm just going to give it the win to Echidna here, just because I think speed overall next to movement is the best stat. Her speed is enough to double some of the slower enemies, even if it's she isn't hitting as hard, whereas Bartre is either going to get doubled, excluding the extremely slow enemies generals, he's either going to just not get double or get double. That's it. There's also just big advantage of skill, and a lot of games kind of overkill, but in Binding Blade you really want every drop of skill you can get. Just accuracy is pretty shaky. So having a sword, more accurate weapon type to use, have more control of the weapon triangle, it's very close, but I'm going to give the win to Echidna. Also from Binding Blade, you have the choice of 2 dancers, which are organics, depending on which of the 2 routes you go to, depending on which village you visit in Chapter 9. There are differences in their stats, both in their base stats and their growth rates. And even though neither one of them are capable of doing combat, there is a difference, in how much stats can affect things. More HP is good. If you accidentally leave your dancer exposed, more speed and luck makes them more likely to dodge. But ultimately, the stats are so minimal, they're not really relevant because just in general, if you have your dancer exposed, you've made a mistake on your part. That I'm going to give this one a tie. Now, some people might call that a cop-out answer, and that's fair, but I think the differences are so negligible that it's basically a tie. If I absolutely had to choose, excluding which of the 2 routes is more difficult, just looking at the characters in a vacuum, I think Elffin's stats are a little bit better if memory serves, but that's if I absolutely had to choose. Generally, I would say they're a tie. Next, we have Juno versus Dayan, also from Binding Blade. The way this one works is a little bit weird. It takes after Chapter 16/16X, if the combined EXP gained of your 2 Pegasus Knights is greater than your Nomads, you'll go to Ilios route to get Juno. If it's your combined EXP gain on your Nomad characters is greater than the EXP gain on your Pegasus Knights character, you go to Sakai and get Dayan. Both of these characters, I think, have 1 chapter to really shine, and that's Chapter 21 with all the Wyvern Knight reinforcements. Juno can help you help your units ferry across the mountains and avoid certain reinforcement zones, helping that way. Whereas Dayan, he has access to good bows, the silver bow and the and he can help outright kill some of those wyverns. Generally, all of Dayan's stats are equal to or slightly better than Juno's. I think Juno has slightly more luck, but that's about it. Kind of controversial choice here, but I'm actually going to give the win to Juno. just because at chapter 21, it's like, yeah, Dayan is more helpful at fighting them, but I'd rather just not fight them at all. And yeah, you have other flyers available to you, like your deployment slots for chapter 21. It opens up a lot, but having more flyers, having more access, just rescue and drop them across the mountains. I personally value that more than Dayan's combat potential, but I definitely can see the argument for Dayan. Next, going into Blazing Blade, we have Wallace versus Geitz. So at a certain chapter, if the combined levels of your three lords, Hector, Eliwood, and Lynn, are 50 or greater, you'll go to the chapter where you can get Geitz. Whereas if they're 49 or lower, you go to the chapter where you can re-recruit Wallace. If you're looking at their stats, it's no contest. Giving the in here to Geitz or Geitz. Pretty much all of his base stats are equal to or better than Wallace, with the exception of defense. Unsurprising, it's a general. And surprisingly, he has a little bit less resistance, but otherwise, strength, HP, speed, skill, critically like movement, luck, they're all better. Same thing with like growth rates. He actually has, I think, he has better HP growth, strength growth, speed, skill, that sort of thing. He's also just in a better class. Like armor, not general is not a good class thanks to its like terrible speed and also slow movement. That 1 point of speed can, 1 point of movement can really make a difference. To Wallace's credit, I think it's easier to get his chapter than Geitz's, especially like in hard mode where EXP gain is so sharply reduced. Many players are probably going to go to the map with Wallace, but I still give the edge to Geitz just because if you go to Wallace's chapter, he's not even worth recruiting. You just get out there like before you're recruiting him. And even if you're like going for like say full recruitment, you'll recruit Wallace and they'll go straight to the bench. Whereas conversely, Geitz or Geitz, if you go to his chapter, not only is he like worth recruiting, it's not too difficult to get him, but if you do get him, I think he's worth using. He's just an overall better unit. Also worth noting their weapon ranks. Wallace has like an A in lances, but like an E in axes, I want to say. Whereas Geitz has like a B in bows and B in axes. So even though it doesn't have an A rank, his just overall weapon ranks, I'd say, are better than Wallace's. Also from the Blazing Blade, we got Karel and Harken, another very like weird route split like character. The map where one of these two can potentially join, there's two versions of it, depending on the EXP gain of your Gaiden ring users. Priscilla, Sarah, Urk, and Lucius, for some reason Canos is not included, versus the EXP gain of your Hero Crest users. Raven, Karel, or not Karel, Raven, Bartre, Dorcas, and Guy. You can either go to the general version of the map or the Karel version of the map, each with their own specific requirements of which one of these two will show up. One of them is dependent on how many of like the promoted enemies you killed. The other one is dependent on how many chests you've opened. And either way, you kind of have to slow down a bit if you want Harken. But I would say he is worth it. He is the better unit. Karel does have more speed and skill, and I want to say luck, but Harken has better strength, defense, HP, and potentially if you play in a Hector hard mode, you can get a few more hard bonuses as well. It's also the weapons they start with. Karel just has like a Wudu or Wudao, which is basically just like an alternate version of a Killing Edge, where Harken has to think of the game's like only like Brave Sword. There is that. Karel does have a 15% crit boost due to being like a sword master, but I wouldn't say that's as good as Harken having access to axes and therefore has access to 1 to 2 range. Harken is one of like the best units you can get. The only thing really holding back is late availability, where just Karel is just kind of like a mediocre swordmaster unit who's stuck at like 1 range, excluding like exceedingly rare like 1-2 range swords. Next up, we have Ina versus Nasir from Path of Radiance. This is a very interesting one. Both of these characters fulfill the same role. They're one of the few characters that can potentially damage Ashnard in the final fight if you're like Ike is RNG screwed or something. If you defeat the Black Knight, you get Nasir. If time runs out or you retreat, you get Ina. That reason, some people have argued Ina is actually superior to Nasir because if you get Ina, your Ike is like RNG screwed, you need her, which is conversely, if you defeat the Black Knight, your Ike's already good enough to take on Ashnard. You don't need Nasir. But I think just looking at these in a vacuum, just like when they join, I think it's clear like Nasir is the better unit overall. Ina joins at chapter 10 compared to Nasir's like Ina joins like level 10, whereas compared to like Nasir joins like level 18 or so. So potentially if you train Ina up a lot, she can even like surpass Nasir, but that's a lot of like bonus experience, like kills to feed her for it to be more trouble than it's worth. Overall, both of these units, they're not that great. They're joined like pretty late into the game, locked to one range, kind of like low movement. But I do think since Nasir's stats are overall better than Inna's at base, I'm giving him the win here. We have a few more characters that help in the fight against Ashnard. If you're playing on normal mode, you'll have the choice to recruit one of these three units. Like I think it's like at the end of turn 2, I want to say, and they can help out for the whole map. But on hard mode and Maniac, even though I've never played Maniac, they only come in after like Ashnard enters his second phase. Which, if you've got a trained up enough Ike, all three of these will likely just do nothing. I still have to pick one of these three to be the best, and it's definitely not Naesala, just because even though he has the best speed of the three, it's overkill. But yeah, he can double Ashnard, but he doesn't even do enough damage to like outpace Ashnard's passive healing. So looking at Tibarn versus Gifca, because Tibarn can fly, he can potentially reach areas sooner that Gifca cannot. But Gifca does have more movement, more strength, and like more survivability. So for that, I'm going to give it to Gifca. Generally, all three of these units, they're not really going to do much of anything. But for some reason, like you didn't invest heavily enough in Ike and you actually need their help. Even though Gifca might take longer to reach Ashnard, depending on how far he is when you engage or that sort of thing. If you actually need one of these helps, Gifca is probably your best option. And then again, we have the third and final round of Arran versus Samson, this time in the remake, Shadow Dragon. Their stats are pretty similar to their Shadow Dragon Blade of Light incarnation, but because of the way weapon level works, weapon level isn't a stat, it's just weapon ranks. They both have, I think, like a D in swords in this game, but Arran has an A in lances, Samson has a B in axes. And while there are some good things you could do with an A in lances, I think just the demand for axes is more demand. So part of that reason I'm going for Samson. And again, the other part is just because Arran's stats, like, yeah, he's mobile, but just kind of mediocrity on amount, versus Samson actually has fine combat potential. A game like Genealogy, the Holy War maps are just massive. Arran might like win out, but here they're big, but they're not that big maps anyway. I'm going to give the win to Samson for the third and final time. Next, we have Shura versus a pair of boots. I did talk about this briefly in my last video, going over 5 characters not worth recruiting. And I know this one isn't really a character, but I still think it's worth talking about. So Shura does have a lot of good things going for him. He has a good strength, and then the next chapter after he joins in Conquest is known as like Ninja Hell by the fan base. Give him like a speed tonic and or like a meal boost, he can reach doubling thresholds combined with his weapon triangle advantage. And he has like the lock touch ability. That can make that chapter a lot easier. The main problem I find is like after that, he just kind of falls off. Like he has like pretty low growths. His only good ones are like speed and resistance, I want to say. After that, pretty much all I'll be doing is maybe like a stat backpacking because, hey, at least he's already promoted and he provides +1 to the best stat in the game, movement. And let's say, yeah, a movement, sure, it does all that stuff. He helps in chapter 17, gives you Killer Bro and Mint, and he does +1 movement, everything the boots do and more. Thing is, if you recruit Shura, he does not open up like more deployment slots. You have to like bench one of the characters you've been using. And most likely you're already making use of like pair up anyway. You might be like pairing up Master Ninjas, Paladins, Wyvern Riders. You're already getting +1 movement, and you can't just pair up Shura on another pair up bot. You get +1 movement on top of that, but boots, you can do that. You can pair up a unit with like a ninja +1 movement and give them the boots. For that reason, I think I'm going to give the win to the boots. It is close. Like, I can see the argument for Shura. He is helpful in chapter 17. I just find beyond that, boots are just more useful overall. Consider, like, if Shura just joined, no opportunity cost, you couldn't get the boots, would you use him in every single playthrough? Probably not. You'd probably use him like chapter 17, then send him to the bench. Whereas conversely, like if you got just a pair of boots at the end of chapter 16, you didn't get Shura, those would be useful in every single run throughout the entire campaign, that extra point of movement. And lastly, we have Sonya versus Deen again. As a remake of Fire Emblem Gaiden, it's pretty faithful to the original, and once again, I would say that Deen comes out on top for the same reasons as last time. It just requires less investment to his promoted class, and overall base stats are better. Add on to the fact that Sonya no longer has access to Sagittae and Sephiram. She does get some more spells. I think it's like Entrap and like Rewarp. But the amount of like how far off those spells are and the amount of like effort to get to them it's generally just not worth it, whereas Deen is just a very useful unit right out the box. And those are my thoughts on the Arran Samson archetype characters. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments about characters you think I over or underrated, please let me know below. This is Enigmatic Mr. L, signing out.